Phil, you've been been considered one of the leading thinkers in the faith-based world on media and how to effectively use it. From your perspective, in surveying the faith-based media landscape we're in right now, are churches and organizations getting it right, so to speak, in regard to maximizing their online potential?
Well, it's interesting. What happened during the pandemic was that I thought I'd be out of business because a lot of the work our company does is working with churches and ministry organizations, helping them understand media. And I thought we were going to shut our doors and I'd be a greeter at Walmart. But I started getting flooded with calls of pastors who had no clue what was going on. How do we live stream? How do we maximize it? How do we connect with an audience? I'd had pastors years before tell me, Phil, I don't mind live streaming, but that's not real ministry. Let me tell you, they changed their tune when churches were shut down. And so I've seen a new awareness of pastors realizing just how important this whole digital thing really is. And that's been gratifying. I still think we're not using it to its potential. Even though in the middle of the pandemic and the church lockdowns, I did see a social media post by a pastor who said, now I'm going to be outside the church at 3:00 on Wednesday afternoon with a basket. And if you'd like to drop by a check, I'd be grateful. And I thought that guy's going to get creamed. But most pastors that I know have really embraced it and done some amazing things. In fact, I've had pastors that tell me, I'm a pastor, so I feel guilty saying this, but we're doing so well online, I'm not sure I want to go back to the building.
Yeah.
So, but honestly, it's not an either or. It's both and. I think we need to be doing both really well.
As we've been discussing, a lot of these churches may have had to close their doors if technology and having the ability to do a Facebook Live or YouTube Live or whatever, they would have had to close down.
That's right.
It saved a lot of people.
I tell pastors, hey, be thankful for your media team. Had it not been for them, you would have definitely been out of business.
Do you think churches will ever return to traditional community, I'll call it? Or is the current situation here to stay?
I think it's here to stay. However, in my experience, and I've traveled throughout the pandemic, I've traveled all over the country, around the world actually, and looking in on churches and checking them and seeing how they're doing. And I'm thinking that people will come back, but a significant number will probably cut back 1 or 2 Sundays a month. They did get used to watching it online at home, and we are lazy human beings. And so I think that a certain number will cut back. However, I think people, my thing is this. I had a number of pastors call me and say, Phil, I spent the last 2 years telling people how awesome online worship is. How am I ever going to get them back in the building?
Right.
And my response was, if all they do is watch you preach, then you're not going to get them back. But if your church is vibrant, if it has outreaches and it engages with people, then they're going to want to enjoy that. They're going to come back to that.
I know from a personal standpoint at my church, we used to have 3 services on Sunday, but due to the online piece, we're now down to 2 services on Sunday. So, want to talk about the book, the new book that's coming. It's called Ideas on a Deadline, How to Be Creative When the Clock is Ticking.
Yeah.
What was the catalyst or the inspiration for writing
Well, first of all, I think in the world we live in, we could always use more creative everybody, politicians, business leaders, church leaders. And so the book really isn't just for filmmakers or artists or creative people or writers. It's really for everybody. And one of the things that I think people suffer from, there's a huge myth out there that, I need this creative idea, so I'm just going to wait till the muse hits or the creative fire falls from heaven. Let me tell you, it doesn't work that way. I've spent my whole career writing television scripts, producing television programs, and the network is not going to wait on a show because I can't come up with a good idea. For about 7 years, I was partners in a major TV commercial company, and we did Super Bowl commercials. And the Super Bowl ain't going to hold back if I don't come up with a good idea.
Yeah.
And so I've lived my whole life under the gun. So I decided to write a book that really shared my experience and the experience of a lot of studies and research out there about how to make ideas happen when you need them the most. It's really not about, Chuck Close, a great artist, said, amateurs wait for inspiration. The rest of us just show up and get to work. And that's kind of the way it is. But there's a lot of techniques and ideas that will help you really prime that pump.
Yeah. So why is creativity such a necessary commodity for teams and leaders to stay competitive?
Sure. Absolutely. Well, not to be too spiritual, but it's interesting to me that God chose to introduce himself in the first verse of the Bible as a creator. He's got a lot of attributes. He could have, introduced himself in a lot of different ways, but he chose as a creator. And I think that creativity is an exceptionally important thing. It's the only way we're going to break through, whether it's in science, whether it's in the arts, whether it's in music or literature. I think it's just incredibly important. And I think we were created to create. I mean, that's what we're all about. People love it. And I get really frustrated. By the way, there's no research at all that indicates some people are born creative and others aren't. I mean, get a group of toddlers in a room, they're all wildly creative. But there is some research that indicates about first grade, maybe 6 or 7 years old, we start losing our creativity. So a lot of it has to do with the way our school systems are set up. And I think people just start neglecting, and it's like a muscle. If you don't work it out, you lose it.
It atrophies. In your book, you write that there is a heightened need for creativity.
Yeah.
Why is that? I mean, can't organizations just kind of get by with how they've always done things?
Well, we live in a creative age, and if for people that have been under a rock for the last 20 years, the world is changing faster than we've ever experienced. And I mean, one researcher indicated that we see an average of about 100,000 media messages every single day. We live in the most distracted culture in the world, and that's largely because new apps are being developed, new techniques are being developed, new science. I mean, think of the COVID vaccine, how quickly that came online. Whether you agree with it or not, it was a remarkable effort. And so I think that creativity is so critical to staying up with the speed the world is changing in.
Yeah. So you've been a media producer in Los Angeles for a long, long time, many, many years. From your perspective, what's the most important thing to consider when it comes to mindset, motivation, and method behind the creative process?
Well, it's interesting that mindset is really, really important.
Yeah.
I think, I know people that want to be creative, but they're so unorganized. They have no idea what they're doing. They're never gonna crawl out from that stack of stuff they have to do. And so in the book, I talk a little bit about just getting organized is key. So often we live in this cult of productivity. And everything is productivity apps and notebooks and all this kind of stuff. And sometimes we can be so productive that we just lose all our creativity. So I believe that you want to use just enough to help get organized, prioritize what you're supposed to be doing. But I worked with a guy early in my career that spent the first 2 hours of every day just organizing his to-do list. He never actually accomplished anything, but he had a magnificent to-do list. So we can't let that control our lives, but we do need to use some level of organization to really open ourselves up for the time to think, the time to be creative, the time to really do what we have to do.
So it's been said that there are no new ideas in Hollywood. I mean, and you kind of look at it from the outside, and you see all these remakes, reimaginings of former movies or television shows. And it's been it seems to be happening with more and more frequency as we go on. So my question is, why is it so much harder to come up with creative ideas in this strange work from home world that we're in right now?
It's really true. A couple of reasons. Number one, the model is broken in Hollywood like it is in a lot of businesses because people don't want to take risks anymore. I mean, they're just afraid of taking risks. Hollywood would rather invest in Ghostbusters 9 than come up with a brand new creative idea because they know there's an audience for that and they know they can reach that crowd.
It's a license to make money, basically. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's one thing. I think another thing is people just get so stuck in the way they do things. I wrote a book years ago called Jolt. Get the Jump on the World. Oh, well, thank you. And I wrote it because I wanted people to help people position themselves for this accelerated change that's happening in our culture. And one of the studies I uncovered was that a significant number of open heart surgery patients within 2 years go back to their old lifestyle, which means people hate change so much, they're willing to risk death to keep from changing.
That's crazy when you think of it.
And so people just hate to change, but I think we need to break out of that. We need to try something new. I read a quote this morning that, if you want something you've never had, you've got to do something you've never done. And people are just nervous about trying that out.
You mentioned a couple minutes ago that you have spent basically your whole career working under the gun.
Yes.
So my question is, what tips can you share on how to develop amazing ideas while under pressure?
Yeah, well, it's interesting in the book, Ideas on a Deadline, I talk about the fact that most of us think it's all in our brain. We sit in our office, we bang our head against the wall coming up with this idea. But there's so many things we can do physically. For instance, walking is a great thing. Research indicates, I'll tell you, you start walking, the ideas start flowing. Soren Kierkegaard, Danish theologian, loved to walk. Charles Dickens went through a real insomnia period and for about 6 or 8 months, he would get up and walk 10 to 20 miles through downtown London in the middle of the night. Wrote a remarkable little book called Night Walks on the experience. And a lot of experts look back and see most of the characters he came up with in his amazing novels are people he probably saw on the street during those walks. So walking is a way. Showers are a way. I don't know about you, but when that water hits me, ideas start flowing. Now, my problem was by the time I get out of the shower, dry off, find a pen and paper, I'd forgotten the idea. So an assistant in my office came up and
So
was
you got
Googling.
a waterproof whiteboard? you put in the
Exactly. She
shower?
found a waterproof.
Oh, I
legal
was
pad.
joking.
No, it's called Aqua Notes. She found literally a waterproof legal pad.
Amazing.
And my productivity shot through the roof. And so little things like that can make it. Understanding dreams and how they work is really, really critical. So those little techniques like that and some others that I talk about in the book are ways that we could suddenly take an active role in triggering. And by the way, while I'm on that subject, let me just say, ideas are the most fragile thing in the world. If you really want to start being creative, write them down. You will never catch me without 2 or 3 apps on my phone for taking notes. I carry index cards in my pocket. I always want to be able to capture an idea because how many times have you woken up in the middle of the night with a brilliant idea and you think, oh, I'll remember that in the morning? And of course you never do. And so I think just being able to capture ideas on the spot is absolutely critical.
That reminds me of an old Seinfeld episode where Jerry would wake up in the middle of the night and write down something
Yes.
that he thought was a great bit. Then he'd get up in the morning and look at it, and it's just gibberish.
Yeah,
what he was looking at.
That's true. Boy, I've had that experience, I'll tell you. Let me say this.
No, go ahead.
I was at a Christmas party a number of years ago in L.A., and I met a guy who was very successful businessman from South Africa. And I have the spiritual gift of asking what everybody else in the room is thinking. So I said, so how'd you make all your money? And he told me years ago, back in the days of flip phones, remember the cell phones? He said his wife wanted him to go shopping. And he said, I hated shopping, but I love my wife. So I went with her. But after about an hour or so of shopping, I got tired. So I sat down on a bench in the mall while she went into a dress store. He said, I started watching teenagers use their cell phone. And he said, this idea hit me out of the blue that what if they could download their favorite songs and use them as ringtones on their phone? Nobody had ever done that before. And he said, I thought it was a pretty good idea. So I found a brochure on the bench. I got a pen out. I wrote the idea down, put it in my jacket pocket. And at that same moment, my wife called me into the store to look at a dress. He said, I walked in the store, completely forgot about it. He said, 6 months went by, went to the closet, put on that jacket, just happened to reach in the pocket and found that note. And he said, you know what? I got to do something about this. So he bought a computer, got the rights to 5 songs, made a deal with a local cell phone company. 2 years later, he sold the company for $70 million. And he looked at me and he said, now, Phil, here's the thing. Had I not written that note down, that idea down, he said, it would have completely gone away.
Just floated away.
It was a $70 million idea that he would have forgotten. I've never been without a pad and pencil.
Well,
since then.
now I'm going to keep a a pad by the side of the bed and install one of those Aqua Notes.
There you go.
deals in the shower.
And they come with stickers for the tiles. You can just pop it right on the
Right, perfect.
It'll change your life.
Sometimes for organizations,
Sure.
it's hard to turn the Titanic around, so to speak. And what I mean by that is oftentimes many people have a hard time changing their perspective on creativity and how to approach creativity to create new content or products. I've experienced that in my own career. What advice do you have for organizations in changing that mindset to be open to creativity and new ideas?
It's really critical. And it starts at the top. You know, it starts with leadership. As you say, the example you give is like that's where the phrase rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic comes from. It's not going to do you a lot of good because the ship is going down. And I've discovered that if the leadership isn't open, it's going to be a real challenge. But I've also discovered that individuals, if you're listening to this or watching and you want to make those kind of change happen in your organization, you could start in the middle. Make little change happen. You know, don't do anything drastic that will upset anybody, but start making small changes because it can happen really tiny, but suddenly start growing. And here's the thing. People need to see that it's worth the risk. In most organizations, the reason they don't change, employees don't change, is because they think, well, you know what? I don't know if it's worth the embarrassment. I don't know if it fails. What do we do?
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Right?
And they'll go their whole career doing the same old thing. So you really, as a leader, you have to make it look, you have to make them understand it's worth the effort and the trouble. And if you can do that, it really helps.
Yeah, I have a friend in our industry who his joke is just keep making the sausage the same way, just keep churning it out.
Oh, man, there are people good at that.
Oh, yeah. So is this book for general audiences or is it specialized for people in the media industry?
That's a great question. And I really did write it for coaches, teachers, business leaders.
Great.
Because we all, for me, creativity is about solving problems. And everybody experiences that. We all are having to solve problems every day. And most of us have to do it on a deadline. A coach has got to come up with that new play scheme for the next football game. A teacher's got to come up with a new teaching plan. So many of us, that real estate deal has got to go down. And so I think we face so many deadlines in our life. We have to come up with solutions for the problems we're wrestling with. So I wrote it in a way, obviously, creative people are going to love it. If you're an artist or a writer or designer or filmmaker, you're going to love it. But it's also designed for anybody in any walk of life, just to help me bump up my level of creativity and get confident enough that I can have those ideas when I desperately need it.
That's great. Just a couple more questions for you.
This is great.
After people have read Ideas on a Deadline, How to Be Creative When the Clock is Ticking. Boy, that's a long title, but it's good. It's a good one. No, it's great. As an author, what would you like your readers to get out of the experience? I mean, what's your greatest hope for this book?
My hope is that people feel more confident in their creativity. So many people, I'll speak at conferences on creativity, and I'll always get a portion of the crowd come up and say, I've never been a creative person. I'm not a creative person. We all are creative. We are all born creative. So I just want to encourage people that you are creative. You can deliver ideas when you need them most, when the pressure is on. And if people can walk away with that, I'll be more than happy, because I think the world would be a better place.
Final question for you. I am serious this time. This is the final question.
I love this.
From your perspective, what do you see as the next big thing on the horizon for creativity? Is there something in the near future that you think this is going to be big?
It's interesting. If I knew the answer to that, I'd be a billionaire, and I wouldn't be wasting my time.
Well, you're the guy with the $70 million idea.
That's right. You know what? The interesting thing about the next big thing is, when I was doing this book, I was really wrestling with the issue that publishing today is where music was about 10 or 15 years ago, undergoing a dramatic digital change. Every aspect of our life is undergoing a dramatic digital change. And so I just think the next big thing is learning to adapt to that, understand and get comfortable with it. One of our clients is led by a very old school guy. His assistant has to set him up for a Zoom call. And he's a great guy and I love him, but he is just not aware that the train is coming right at him. And I think that the world is changing so quickly that we need to get more comfortable living in that mode. And if we can do that, the future is open to anybody.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
Thank you. This is great.
Phil, thanks for the time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. This is fun.